actually update a car. So we have now added the getters and setters to the person, and we have added a relationship with the car as a one-to-many with the person, so a person can have many cars and a car belongs to one person. However, if we would like to, for example, change who the owner of a car is, we're going to need a put mapping that is for updating a car. So we go ahead and we add a put mapping and we put it here as cars and ID here. Perfect, because we're just targeting a car here directly. And we don't need to go through a person because each car has a unique identifier. So we can reach them directly. And then we go update car. And we have path variable ID. So along. And there we go as well. And what we want to do now is to first make sure that the car actually exists. And before we do that, we actually need to add a request body, because a put request is going to contain, in the request body, is going to contain the updated values that you want. So I'll call this updated car, and it's going to be a car. Perfect. So remember that request body is going to take key value pairs from the actual body of the request. We saw that before in the post request, but this time in the put request we also have body, and it's going to map that to create an instance based on those key value pairs that are coming from the put request, and it's going to create a new instance of a car here that is called updated car. All of this is going to happen automatically, and we will have car is equal to car repository dot find by ID, and then we try to find it by the ID that we have in the path variable, and then we do or else throw. So as usual, we will throw a resource not found exception if we did not find it, if we did not find the actual car. And to try adhere to our new or other standard, we can do like this. And what we want to do here as well is on updated cars. Now that we know that the car actually exists that we want to update, we actually want to set the ID of this one, but we don't really have it. So let's go back to, let's see here, car, and we need to generate the getters and setters code, generate getter and setter for ID. Perfect. And then you can do, a cool thing you can do is if you press Command and E, you can actually go back to the latest file that you were in and just press enter. So you can see Command E again. I will go back to the previous file. So that is a very handy hotkey on IntelliJ. Anyways, so with that, I will now do set ID, and in the set ID, I will add the ID here. So what I'm doing now is I'm setting the ID of the updated car, and if you remember from a previous video on post where we had the put request, it is what is going to happen is that in this newly created instance that is based on the request body of the actual request, when we set the ID of this one to be the same of the car that already exists, and we then do a car repository dot save, it's not going to create a new car because this one's ID is set to the same ID as that one, so it's going to overwrite the old car that had that ID. If I wouldn't have had an ID here set, then it will create a new car. But now that I've set an ID to an existing car's ID, then it updates that car with the values of the new here. And then I finally want to do return response entity dot OK, and we enter updated car is what we want. Perfect. So with that, we should have a put mapping for the update. So we can go ahead and try it out. So we do slash Gradle W, and we open our Postman here. And I've actually already prepared some requests here, but I can remove them just so people can see how it is done from scratch. And I can remove this one as well. Okay, so in this case here, I can actually create a new request and we call it update car with ID 1, and we do a put, and then we have to check the put matic around cars and then ID, so localhost and then cars, and then of course the IDs, which is 1. Then the body here is going to be a JSON, and we're going to need something like this, and we're going to need a, let's see here, top speed is what exists. Top speed is equal to, so let's say this time we set it to something really fast like 200, and then we also go with the, let's see here, the registration number, there we go, which should be, we can just put that as www, and then we need the owner as well. So the owner here, when you want to set the owner, since that one is not just a, how do I say, a primitive type, so to say, it is actually another module. So what you have to do here is have this as an object, and you actually need to supply the ID of the owner that you want it to be. So in this case, let's say ID 2 if we have a second owner, and we can make sure that we add a second owner as well. So let's duplicate this, create a person, create person Alice, then let's say 34, and in the body put Alice 34. Okay, so we start out by, let's say, oh, I didn't run, I didn't do boot run. So there we go. And while we are waiting, I just double check and make sure that things are looking good. Yes, great person. Great here as well. And we're going to create a car as well. Okay, so let's see here. When is it started? No, it's started. So we create the first person. Perfect. Create the second person. It should have an ID of 2. Perfect. We create a first car here. Perfect. And now if we actually list all the people, we can see that there is a person John with 1 car that is on the ID 1, and then there's a person 2 Alice that does not have any cars yet. So let's change so that the car goes from John and goes over to Alice. So in our update car with ID 1, we can see that in our body what we're doing here is we're setting the owner and we're setting the ID to 2 here. So let's try this out, and we're also changing the top speed and registration number at the same time. So let's see here, and let's list all people again. And we can see here now John does not have any more cars, but Alice does. And one thing that is interesting to note here is that in this owner model, you only need to supply the ID, not anything else pertaining to the owner. But everything else you supply, for example, the name of the owner, these things will be ignored. So this will be ignored. And if we try to change the changes back to ID1, so we change back to John, and there we go. This will not mean that John's name will be changed as or something like that. It just looks at the ID just to identify which is the owner, but the name, all of the other things that you put here will be ignored, and we can see it here. If we list all people, we can see the name is so John, so it was completely irrelevant. Now, one of the things that could happen though is that when we're updating, let's say we change this request and we actually forget the owner here in this request, and we press send, you can see that the owner turns into null, and if we list all people, all of a sudden none of them have a car. So this is problematic. So what has happened now is that the car doesn't have a owner at all. And you might not want to, like in your model, so whatever, however you're modeling your system, that might not be acceptable. A car, maybe it's a requirement that a car must have an owner, right? So in that case, what you would want to do is to change the car, so the car, the property, the owner property of the car to be not nullable. You don't want it to be able to be null. And let's take a look at how that looks. So if we close this down and we go to car and we check the owner here, we go at nullable. Actually, no, that is not what we do. We go to, we write first join column, and then we go nullable is equal to false here. So this add join column is just gonna be a annotation to change some settings for this column that we have. And one thing to notice is that if you have, the reason that we have join column is here for the because the owner is part of it is a foreign key, so it is a column that has to do with a relationship. These other columns, they don't have to do anything with a relationship. They are just plain values. If you would want to add not nullable to them, you would just do column and then nullable equal to false. All right. So this could be just usually what a good thing to do. I mean, if you don't want the top seed to be able to be null, if you don't want the registration to be able to null. So generally that's a pretty good idea. So we can actually add it on both of these as well. Okay. And you don't need to add it to the ID because since it's a primary key, it's not allowed to be null either way. And let's just reboot this one to see if it actually starts up properly. There we go, we started the app. And let's create the person again. And let's create a car. And let's try to update that car without providing an owner here. So let's see here. And then you can see you get an internal server error, so it no longer works. So it's going to try to send to the database an update on the car to say that the owner is null, but the database is going to reject that, so it's going to kind of crash. Now, you might not want your application to actually crash when you do that, even though it happens on a separate thread, so the application is still running. It is better to actually inform the sender here that they need to supply that they were the ones who were doing something wrong. So instead of having a 500, which means that the server crashed, it is better to have some kind of 400 status, which means that the client has done something wrong. And in this case, it's the client that has forgotten to actually provide the owner. So what we can do here is actually we can add validation. And to do that, we first need to add another dependency. And the dependency that we're going to add is called Spring Boot Starter Validation. So just add it here. Whoops, not there. Like that. And when we have added it, we would reload here just to make sure that the IDE is up to date with the annotations. And let it build for a while. And what we're gonna need to do then when it's done building is to actually go to car, and on this nullable part here, we would like to add, let's see if it has it yet. Okay, it's still configuring the project, so it's not seeing it yet, but we can actually still just add it. Go ahead, not blank. That should be working. And if I do great would run, let's see. It is taking a bit of longer time now because there are many things going on at once. No, it's still crashing. There is still something. Yes, I need to import it, of course. There we go. And now the Gradle actually finished. Now it noticed it. Perfect. Now we do it again. There we go. Now we bring back Postman. Repeat the process. Send to people. Create a on. Create a car. Whoops. What did it do now? Let's see here. No validator could be found for constraint not blank. That I forgot. And one of the things is that you should not be using not blank here, but rather using not null. That is what we want here. And if we go to the actual car controller, we need to add an annotation here for this car that we're sending in the request body. We need to add a valid. So this is going to apply also to this argument. When you have two annotations like this, they both apply to this one argument. And now we could try to run this again. And we can put this away. Perfect, now it's up. We create a person. We create a car on that person. And now we try to update the car with a, how do I say, a empty with no owner here, and we do it, and what we get back here is a status 400 bad requests. So you see the server is not crashing anymore, rather it's already recognizing that you are sending in a bad, how do I say, request body, because it's missing the owner ID. And when it's missing the owner ID, it's as if you're trying to set the owner to null. So what we need to do here is put the owner, and then of course apply the ID here, and then say 1. For example, we only have ID 1 here right now, so that's the only one we can use right now. And I'm missing a colon here, and then we put it down, and there you can see, you got a 200 OK response. So that is how you could enforce the car to not have a null owner, so that the car always needs to have a owner, right? And with the, actually, the difference here is on the first thing that I added here. So before I added not blank, you can actually add to, um, how do I say, primitive values, or values that are like only strict values that are not based on another model. This one is based on a foreign model, so that's why you cannot have not blank here. But if you put not blank on, for example, top speed or registration number, so exactly like not blank, and then you choose to validate the car as well, it's going to mean that registration number cannot neither be null, and it cannot be also an empty string. So Not blank could be good to use for these kind of values. So you could put not blank here as well. All right.